Years ago, when my oldest daughter was about 2 years old, I came to one of these banquets, and I remember sitting in the back at a table with my husband, and a woman was sharing her abortion story, and it was just so powerful. And I remember thinking, I want to be that person someday. I want to share my story. And I went home and I prayed about it, and here I am with all of you sharing my story. So thank you to Deb and Terry from Aspire Together for inviting me here to speak to you. It's such a privilege. First of all, I have a question. How many of you played with baby dolls when you were little? The show of hands. Yeah, mostly all of you. How about any of you guys with a show of hands? A few of you. My son played with baby dolls when he was little because he has an older sister. We just always had baby dolls hanging around. And I think that it's made him more nurturing as he has grown up and as he's played with his younger sister. So baby dolls are a really great toy to have around even with little boys. Well, I love baby dolls. They were my babies. I was their mother, and I remember I used to, put them to bed. I used to change their diapers, their clothes, take them for walks. I just loved baby dolls so much. They were my favorite toy. One time, my mother, she had an antique vase that was broken by my older brother and sister. So we went into this shop, this antique shop, and when I walked in, inside this glass case was this beautiful china doll. It had a blue bonnet on and a long blue dress. And when the shopkeeper took the doll out and showed me it, it had a knob on the top of its head. And when you turned the knob, the faces changed. So one face was crying, one face was sleeping, the other face was happy. Well, I fell in love with this doll. And about a week later, after we left the shop, after a week later, I remember bugging my mother for this blue dolly. She didn't know what I was talking about because she thought I meant a doll with a blue face. But when I went back in with my mother to the antique shop, I showed her, this is the blue dolly that I wanted. My parents separated when I was 2. So my mom, she didn't have a lot of money, but somehow she scraped the cash together and she bought me this doll. I loved her. I loved her so much that I took her everywhere with me, even though my mom told me not to. And she got hurt quite a few times because I would take her on stroller rides, and she fell one time and she broke her head. And one time I took her down in the basement with a wagon ride, and she fell and she broke her hand. So she had to go back to the antique shop quite often. But I loved the idea of being a mother, and the church that I grew up in, it also had this value system as well. My church that I grew up in, it was kind of a different type of church. It arranged marriages even. So the pastor and the parents would get together and they would talk about, what boy and girl would get married, and they sometimes would get married as early as 16 years old. So this was okay with me. This is what I grew up with, so it wasn't odd to me. And so my girlfriends and I, we just knew that at a young age the pastor would arrange our marriages, and that was our life. We would have babies. Some of the families had 10, 12 kids. And so that's what I was going to be doing with the rest of my life was having children. So, and that was okay because I love babies, and I had this dream that was in me that I just wanted to be a mother. Well, my mother ended up leaving the church, and she remarried. And so my trajectory in life of being a mother just blew out of the water. And I started school. I had never gone to school before. I was homeschooled. All of my friends were in the church. I had no friends. All I had was my mother. My siblings had moved out, and my stepdad. So my life was turned upside down. And after about 6 months to a year of my mother with her new husband, he started to become abusive to me, emotionally and physically. Well, I took it for a while because I wanted to be with my mother. I loved my mother. My mother was my world. And also my little baby sister was born, little Mariana, and I wanted to be with them. But the abuse got to the point where I couldn't take it anymore. And I ended up moving 8 hours to Vermont to live with my father. I'm originally from Buffalo, New York. My dad moved to Vermont when I was about 3 years old. So I never really saw my dad much. My dad visited every year, like a couple times a year around the holidays. So that was the extent of our relationship. So essentially, I moved in with a perfect stranger. My dad is a baby boomer. He was brought up with this viewpoint of life where you go to high school, you graduate high school, you go to college, you graduate college, you get a job, a career with longevity, somewhere where you could retire from, and eventually go on a vacation. That was his longevity. This was his projected life, and this is what he wanted for me as well. Well, I remember having a conversation with him about this and sharing with him that all I wanted to be is a mom. I don't want the career path, and he thought it was preposterous. And so I melded into this person that I thought he wanted me to be. I became this all-American kid. I became a joiner. I played the sports. I joined the choir, and I joined the band. I played drums in the band. I did things so he would love me, and so that I would fit into the view that he wanted for me. All the while, I was looking for the one to make me a mother. These poor teenage boys, they didn't know what hit them when they met me. But after many, many broken hearts, my heart, not theirs, my heart, I graduated from high school and I went to college. My dad wanted me to be a nurse. And so I tried to be a nurse. I tried to take chemistry and math and all those classes, which I'm terrible at because I was homeschooled, and I'm not dissing homeschooling, it's wonderful, but at that point in the 70s, it was not at the state where it is now. So I wasn't inclined that way, but I tried to please him, so I did this. After a year of trying to do college, all while looking for the one, in college even, I didn't pass well enough to do a second year. So I moved back in with my dad, and I got a job. I worked at this gas station. I was a cashier, and finally, months after starting, in walked the one. You know, as a single person, you have this view of this idea of who you think the ideal person is for you. And he was it. He checked all the boxes. So he had his own business, and he said he had lots of money. His parents were Catholic, and he said he was a Christian. He had 2 kids, little girls, from a previous marriage, and I thought, oh boy, I get to step into this mothering right away. I don't even need to have kids. I was 20 years old. Yeah, I wasn't quite ready to have children at that point. I was ready to find the one and get married, but I wasn't quite ready to have kids yet. So it really, he appealed to me. And I remember having conversations with God about this. And God, when God says, no, he's not the one. You're like, but he has all these qualities that I really, really like. And he's like, no, Heather, I got something better for you. I'm like, so there was this inner battle within me. So I was like, shut you out, God. Sorry, I'm choosing my own way. And I did. Chose my own way, and about 3 months into our relationship, we moved in together. And we were living this double life, where over here, I was going to church every Sunday and being the good Christian girl and joined the choir. And we set a wedding date, and I was taking pre-Cana classes to be married in the Catholic Church. And over here, we were living together and having premarital sex, and doing drugs, and whatever else. Well, secrets beget secrets. And all of that caught up with me. And I became pregnant 4 months before our wedding date. I remember finding out when I got pregnant, I needed to sit Robert down and tell him that, that I was pregnant. And I remember we were sitting on the bed, and he took my hand, and he said, Heather, we have to have an abortion. If we don't, I'll be disowned and will never receive the inheritance that my parents have promised me. Boy, that was a predicament that I was in. At that time, I had no community. I had taken my relationship with Robert and put it on a pedestal. He was my only one. I didn't talk to my family in Buffalo. My dad did not like Robert, so I disconnected myself to him as well. I had no friends. He was it. He was all I needed and all I wanted. So I didn't want to lose him. So we went into the clinic, and I remember talking to this counselor, sitting across from her, Robert and I. We sat across from the counselor, and we talked about abortion. Well, years ago, when I was a young girl, my mother came into the kitchen, and she threw a pamphlet on the table in front of my siblings and I, and she said, "This is what abortion is." And I remember looking at the pamphlet and seeing body parts, vacuums, it's bloody and nasty. And I remember thinking, I will never, ever have an abortion. Well, this counselor, she offered something different to me. There was an experimental drug, and I never say it right, never say the name right, it's called misoprostol. It was an experimental drug at the time, and it was free to me because it was experimental. And what she said was that the fetus would act as a miscarriage. So it looked as if it wasn't an abortion. Well, I agreed. I wanted to please Robert, and it wasn't so bad. It wasn't a vacuum. It wasn't bloody. So I went home with the paper bag in my hand, and I took the pills. I experienced period cramping, terrible, terrible cramping and bleeding for 3 days. I remember being in my bed and just rocking and just talking to God and asking for forgiveness for what I had done. I knew it was wrong, but I had done it. After the 3 days, I went back to the clinic. I don't know why I went back to the clinic, except I think that God wanted me to go back to the clinic. It's not typical when a woman takes these pills for them to go back to the clinic. Usually what happens is when they take the pill, the baby is aborted naturally, and baby goes into the toilet with the rest of the stuff. So I went back into the clinic, and they were surprised to see me. I remember saying, they said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, I just want you to check me out, make sure everything's okay." So they did admit me. I went into the room. I put the robe on, put my feet in the stirrups. The nurse walked around, and she said, "Oh, there it is." And she touched my thigh right here. And she placed my baby in a Dixie cup. And she walked away. I remember saying to her, "Wait, I want to say goodbye." And she hesitated. She said, "What?" She said, I said, "I want to say goodbye." And so she walked around and she handed me the cup. And in Psalm 139:13, it says, "You made all the delicate inner parts of my body and knit me together in my mother's womb." Well, my baby was about 8-9 weeks along. And God had already begun forming my child. It had a head. She had arm buds and leg buds, and she had eyes. She fit in the bottom of the Dixie cup. And I looked into that cup, and I said, "I'm so sorry. I wish I could have had you." And then I gave the cup back, and she walked away. And I remember thinking, what is she going to do with that cup? What is she going to do with my baby? She's going to throw my baby in the garbage, isn't she? Shame. Utter shame. It's how I felt afterwards, like I had been beaten up and just guilty. And I remember putting a wall up between God and I and said, "You are perfect, and I am such a sinner. Here's a wall, don't cross it." And I lived like that for a really, really long time. I didn't think it was possible for God to give me my dream now. Why would he? I had just killed one of his little ones. Why would he give me my dream now? And what right did I have to grieve? I had no right to grieve. It was my choice. So it was a lot of turmoil within me. I really didn't think that God would give me my dream, and I thought that I was too far gone. Robert and I, we did not end up marrying, but 3 years later, we divorced. The rate of divorce for couples that have had abortions is very, very high. And so we didn't last. And I didn't think that anybody would want me. I was a 23-year-old divorcee who had had an abortion. Who would want me now? Esther 9:22 says, "Their sorrow was turned into goodness, into gladness, and mourning into joy." And God turned my mourning into joy when I met the real one, Robert. God is so ironic, and he has such a good sense of humor. I call my husband Cliffy for that reason. And then years later, we became pregnant with our oldest, Shyla. And I remember thinking and talking to God and saying, "Are you nuts? You were going to give me a baby even though I had an abortion?" I couldn't believe it. And the wall that I had erected between God and I had begun to crumble. began to feel his presence a bit in my life again. And then he blessed us again with a son. I couldn't believe it again. And again, I had a conversation with God saying, are you serious? Me? You're going to bless me with 2 babies? And God had given me my dream of being a mother even after what I had done. Well, those babies are 15 and 13 now. And, my husband and I were looking into the next season of life. Shiloh is starting high school, and we were thinking, college is coming and empty nesting. Wow, we get to have time by ourselves. This is great. So there was one day I was sitting at the Five Corners in our town, and I was waiting for the light to turn, and it was just a really dreary day. And I remember having a conversation with God and saying, Lord, I'd really like a tropical vacation. I really would. I'd really like to dip my toes in the sand and just feel your beautiful sun on my face. It is so dreary. My kids have never been on an airplane. We've never gone anywhere tropical. Please, Lord, please, I pray for a tropical vacation. In Jesus' name, amen. I still pray for tropical vacations. Why not? Why not pray for a tropical vacation? God had answered so many of my prayers. He had made my dream come true, having children. Why not pray for a tropical vacation? God can do anything and everything. Well, a couple weeks later, I started to feel this overall yuckiness in my body, just all day long, just yucky. And I remember I cut out wine, I cut out wheat, dairy. I got more sleep, but nothing worked. So I went to the pharmacy thinking, I just need to get a pregnancy test because I have an IUD, which is 99.9% effective. There is no way that I'm pregnant, but I need to rule it out just in case, because I needed to go to the doctor if there was something else going on. It was a Sunday afternoon. I left without telling my husband, went to the pharmacy, came home, took the test, 6 weeks pregnant. Oh, I ugly cried. I so did ugly cry. And I went to my husband, who was sitting at his desk working. And I said, we're pregnant. Still bawling. Still just bawling. And he looks at me and he says, oops. I guess I should have had that vasectomy a while ago. And I said, yes, darling. I guess you should have had that vasectomy a while ago. Let me tell you what. I had a conversation with God about what a tropical vacation looked like. He did not give me my tropical vacation that I wanted. Well, after the initial shock of this pregnancy, we needed to go in and have an ultrasound. Because lots of times when a woman gets pregnant with an IUD, they can have an ectopic or a tubal pregnancy. So I needed to rule that out. So we went in and had the ultrasound. And after the ultrasound, we found out that the baby was perfectly positioned, super healthy. We're like, sigh of relief. They could just take the IUD right out. There was no complications at all. Well, after our sigh of relief, this nurse, I don't know if it was a nurse or a doctor, I don't know who she was, but I remember her looking at her pad of paper and her saying, oh, you had an IUD. Yes, we had an IUD. She said, well, this wasn't a planned pregnancy. No, this was not a planned pregnancy. She said, well, you have options. And I remember looking at her and looking at my husband and looking back at her, not knowing what she was talking about. And then it dawned on me. She was talking about abortion. It totally blew my mind that this woman just offered me abortion, this option of abortion. Abortion is not for settled families, for happily married couples who are financially set. Abortion's for crisis pregnancies, right? I mean, it just blew my mind. Not that any abortion is okay, but that it was the stigma you have with abortion is for teenagers, not for stable families. And I looked at her and I said, there is no other option besides having our baby. And she looked flustered and she said, oh, I'm sorry, it's just policy. We have to offer. It's policy now to have to offer people abortions. And I could have chosen that, and I know people do, and it blew my mind that people actually choose abortions. People that are married and happily married choose abortions. I couldn't believe it. It just blew my mind. I don't know about you, but it blew my mind. Well, I'm so glad that I chose this option, the option to have my baby. Because if I hadn't, I wouldn't be here today. This little baby saved my life. About 4 months into my pregnancy, I started to feel this sharp, knife-like pain right here. And at first, I didn't think much of it. I thought it was just gas, so I sent my husband to bed and I dealt with the pain. But it got so bad that I had to wake him up. I felt like I was going to pass out. And so I woke him up. He rushed me to the emergency room. And I was admitted right away because I was pregnant. And they tried to do an ultrasound, but they couldn't get good imagery because I couldn't lay still. The only comfortable position for me was sitting up and rocking back and forth. I had some flu-like symptoms, some stomach virus symptoms. I had thrown up and such, so they sent me home, saying I had a stomach virus. The pain continued for a week. I went to the doctors 2 more times. I first went to my midwife, and I saw a doctor there, and he said, oh, what did you eat? And my husband said, well, I grilled some venison the other day, and before she got sick, and he said, oh, it's probably just a bad piece of venison, thinking I had food poisoning. They sent me home. The pain continued. I went next to my primary, and they gave me ulcer medicine because it was right here, and they thought maybe it was an ulcer. I learned through that week not to trust man. That doctors and their knowledge and their fantastic knowledge, the God-given knowledge, that they only know so much. To trust God. And during that week, that's what I did. I trusted God. And I remember praying to him and remember the Bible story of the woman with the bleeding disease, that all she had to do was touch the hem of Jesus' robe. That's all she had to do, and she was healed like that. And I knew that God could heal me like that. I knew it. And I trusted that he could. And I prayed for that, but it wasn't his plan. So the pain continued, and I couldn't eat, and I hardly could drink, and I lost almost 40 pounds. Because God is good, and he takes care of his little ones. Little Aubrey was surviving off of my body. Well, after that week, God made it clear to me that he said, you have a twisted intestine. You have, something's wrong with your intestine, and you need to go in and have an MRI. So I did. I went in, we rushed again to the emergency room. I was admitted right away because of the pregnancy, and I had an MRI. And I was admitted right away into surgery because I had a twisted intestine. God had revealed that to me. After the surgery, Dr. Cherish came in. lovely Jewish man, lovely Jewish surgeon. He is the top surgeon in his field. He is the one that goes to other hospitals and teaches them how to do intestinal surgery. Why he was there on a Saturday night, God only knows. But it was to save my life. What he said had happened was because of the pregnancy, and when women are pregnant, their organs get pushed out of the way to make room for the baby. So when that happened, my intestine twisted. And during that week, it had gangrened and atrophied to the point of tissue paper. So at first, he made the incision small, thinking he could get it out without a problem. But because of the way it had atrophied, he had to make the incision larger. And in doing so, he found that I had a birth defect. My small intestines had begun to atrophy because I had scar tissue that was strangling the life out of them. And he said that when he saw this, his heart dropped. He didn't think that he would be able to save my life. But he took all the scar tissue off, and color came back into my small intestines, and I was fine. God had healed me. I can't say that I understand God and how he orchestrates everything, but I do know that God gives us what we need and not what we want. Sometimes he gives us what we want, but he gives us what we need. God knew that I needed my unexpected third child to save my life. Little Aubrey was born a healthy 7 pounds, 1 ounce, even after all that she went through. She is almost 2 years old right now. She is super, super smart, and every time I look at her, I see God's provision for me. I see how through her, he saved my life. And giving me my dream, again, of being a mother. I never anticipated having a third child. Never. Never would I have if God hadn't orchestrated this. Philippians 4:19 says, "And my God will meet all of your needs according to his glorious riches in Christ Jesus." God has met my needs in so many ways. He has also met my needs through Aspire Together. Aspire Together, when the women asked me to speak to you today, Deb mentioned this post-abortion study that they do to heal. And I remember walking out and not thinking much of it, but sometimes you get a little tap on your back. Oh, maybe you should do that study. I'm like, nah, I don't need it. Oh, maybe you should do that study. No, I don't need it. Fine, I'll do it. So I called and I said, yeah, I'll do this study. And I saw it as more of research, more of being able to speak to Aspire Together and their mission of what they offer. Well, after the first week, I discovered that I had a lot of healing still left to do. I'd healed a great deal. I had already, but there was so much more that I hadn't realized that I had to heal from. Ephesians 4:32 says, "Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as Christ Jesus forgave you." I realized that I hadn't forgiven those people in my life that were a part of the decision of the abortion. And one of the meetings, Deb, she sat across from me and she had me pick some stones. And I picked the stones and I put them in some fabric, and she bundled it up and tied it, and she said, here, she gave it to me. She said, throw these away. Toss them away when you are ready to forgive. Well, I wasn't ready right away. It took me a couple of weeks to get into that process and really seek God. And when I was ready, I gathered my family together, my teenagers and my baby and my husband, and we went down to a remote place in the river where I would never go again. And I tossed each of these stones into the river. I threw one in for Robert, my ex-husband, because he chose money. I had to forgive him because he chose money over our baby. I had to forgive my in-laws because they instituted the fact that money was more important than life to my ex-husband. I had to forgive both of my parents for not, I held it against them that they weren't there for me and they were unapproachable during this time. And I had to forgive the clinic because they're in the darkness. They do not know that they do wrong. And I had to forgive them and pray that their eyes be opened. Mother's Day was specifically hard for me. Mother's Day has always been hard, but this time Mother's Day was hard because God was really revealing to me things inside that I hadn't realized before. In Jeremiah 29:71, it says, "For I know the plans I have for you, to give you a future and a hope." During that week, I had gone on websites, abortion websites, and I had looked at the horrific pictures of what happens in abortions. And I did it. I don't know why I did it. I think I did it for research, more of being able to, God says to break our hearts, right? He wants to break our hearts for what breaks his. When I looked at those pictures, my heart was broken. And I realized that I had stolen this child's future. God had great plans for my aborted baby. And I had played God and I had said, no, you are not going to have these plans. You do not have a future. That was my fault, my choice. And I had also stolen what a blessing this child would have been to my family. She would have been 24 years old now. I may have been a grandmother. Who knows? But what a blessing she would have been to my kids. And I have stolen that also away from myself and my family. I don't know if you've noticed, but I have referred to this child as the aborted child, or she. I don't know if she was a girl, but I just have a feeling. But at the end of the process of the Forgiven and Set Free study, the counseling sessions, we name our babies. And we are given a certificate to name our children. And my child, this is her certificate. Her name is Abigail Collins, and she is with Jesus. And in giving her a name, I give her dignity and grace. And I know that I will meet her one day because she's in the arms of Jesus. As of last year, 2018, the anniversary of Roe versus Wade, abortion has been legal for 45 years. It's a long time. According to an article published in Life News on January 18th, 2018, over 60 million unborn children have died as a result of abortions. The numbers are shocking. And the crazy thing is, I don't know anyone else who has had an abortion. It's not something that we talk about. We don't bring it up at the dinner parties, the work functions, even the Bible studies. Even as Christians, we don't feel like we can talk about this And for women who have had abortions, it is our best kept secret. And because abortion is our choice, our personal choice, we don't feel like we have the right to grieve, the right to share, the right to talk about it, because it's our choice. According to Counseling Today, a magazine written by counselors for counselors, they published an article April 3rd, 2018 about how to counsel women who has had an abortion. I guess it's a different process than they would in a normal setting. The article expressed that most women experience depression and anxiety, complicated grief, anger, shame and guilt, self-loathing, and self-esteem issues, relationships issues, and destructive behaviors. I was one of them. These are things I went through, and I needed to heal. I needed the Freedom and Set Free Bible study to get me through. Obviously, women who have had abortions are hurting, and we need to support centers like Aspire Together across our nation. It's an epidemic. Women need to know that they have a place to go for support during their pregnancies. Aspire Together, they offer services for women that want to keep their babies, and they offer them a community that they feel comfortable enough to have their babies. And also for post-abortion counseling. Please support Aspire Together today. They need your prayers, and they need your help in any way you can. Volunteer, any way you can do that. I thank you so much for having me here for you today.